Alexandria, March 415. The sun is going down over the great harbor. The Pharos lighthouse, over 100 meters tall, one of the wonders of the ancient world, is already lit, its fire cutting through the dusk like it has every night for 700 years. The city stretches out below it, marble colonnades lining streets 60 meters wide, the smell of salt water and incense drifting through the evening air. A woman drives her carriage through the streets alone. She's wearing the tribun, a coarse wool philosopher's cloak, deliberately masculine, worn draped over one shoulder. It's a statement. Only men are supposed to wear it. But she doesn't care. She's been wearing it for decades. Her name is Hypatia. She runs the most prestigious school of philosophy in the known world, tracing its lineage back to Plato himself. She's written commentaries on the most advanced mathematics of her era. She builds scientific instruments with her own hands. She advises the Roman governor of Egypt. Christians and pagans sit in her lectures side by side, and both call her teacher. She is, by any honest measure, the most respected intellectual in Alexandria, and tonight a mob is waiting for her. They emerge from the side streets, dozens of men, parabolani, a lay brotherhood officially tasked with caring for the sick and burying the dead. Unofficially, they serve as enforcers for the Bishop of Alexandria, a man named Cyril, who has spent the last 3 years consolidating power, expelling Jews, intimidating the Roman governor, and turning the city's Christian majority into a weapon. A church lector named Peter leads them. They drag her from her carriage. They pull her through the streets toward the Caesareum, a massive building that once served as a temple to the Roman emperors, flanked by 2 towering obelisks carved 15 centuries earlier by Pharaoh Thutmose III. The Christians converted it into a church. Now it serves as Cyril's headquarters. Inside, the columns rise into shadow. Torchlight flickers off stone walls. The mob strips her naked on the floor of what used to be a pagan temple. Peter stands over her. His voice echoes off the vaulted ceiling. You've poisoned this city with your numbers and your questions. You've bewitched the governor with your sorcery. You worship reason when you should worship God. This ends tonight. Hypatia looks up at him, bruised, bleeding, surrounded, and she says, I never asked anyone to stop believing. I only asked them to think. If your God is the truth, why does he need you to kill everyone who asks a question? Peter raises a broken roof tile, a jagged shard of ceramic, sharp enough to cut flesh to the bone, and then the light comes. It doesn't come from the torches. It doesn't come from the doorway. It comes from everywhere and nowhere, flooding the Caesareum from above, pouring through the stone like the building itself is dissolving into radiance. The mob freezes. Peter's hand stops midair. The broken tile clatters to the floor. A figure descends through the light, luminous, unmistakable, and divine. But it's a woman. She's draped in light the way the mob is draped in shadow. She doesn't carry a sword, or a book, or a cross. She doesn't need to. The power radiating from her makes the walls tremble. Every man in the room drops to his knees because their legs give out. Something in their nervous system recognizes what their theology never prepared them for. Peter looks up, tears streaming down his face. He whispers, Lord. The figure looks at him the way you'd look at a child who just set a house on fire. You call yourselves servants of God. You kneel to a father you've never met and kill in his name without hesitation. You were told to love, and you chose this. You were given minds, and you let someone else do your thinking. She looks across the room at each of them. This woman you're about to murder is closer to the divine than any of you will ever be. She sought truth through reason. She taught anyone willing to learn. Your people and hers, side by side. She never threatened anyone with damnation. She never demanded worship. She never asked a single person to kneel. And for that, you want to tear her apart with roof tiles. She turns to Peter specifically. Your prophets wrote books and called them holy. She studied the actual language of the universe, mathematics, and you call it witchcraft. Tell me honestly, which of you is closer to understanding truth? Peter can't speak. His mouth moves, but nothing comes out. The female god steps closer to Hypatia, still crumpled on the stone floor. She kneels, God kneels, and lifts Hypatia's face gently. Get up. Hypatia stands, bleeding, shaking, but standing. The figure turns back to the mob. Your scriptures say, your God drowned the entire world, burned cities to ash, slaughtered the firstborn children of Egypt, commanded a father to sacrifice his own son. I could do the same thing to you right now, and by your own theology, you'd have to call it justice. There is silence, but I won't, because unlike the God, or better yet, the devil, you worship, I don't rule through fear. I don't need your terror to feel powerful, and I don't need to destroy the people who disagree with me to prove I'm right. She gestures toward the mob. Nobody is killed. Nobody is struck down. Instead, something stranger happens. The Caesareum's walls become transparent, like glass, and beyond them the mob can see Alexandria stretching to the horizon. They can see the lighthouse, they can see the harbor, they can see the schools and the libraries and the markets and the homes, and layered over all of it, like a second exposure on a photograph, they can see what this city will become if Hypatia dies tonight. They see the philosophers fleeing, the schools closing, and the books burning. They see centuries of darkness unfolding, women locked out of education, locked out of leadership, locked out of the conversation about what reality even is. They see the witch trials, they see the Inquisition, they see wars fought in God's name across continents. They see the world that their violence will create. And then the vision shifts, and they see the other path, the one where Hypatia lives. You will not kill her. You will watch what happens when reason survives, and you will spend the rest of your lives knowing that you almost destroyed the best thing this city ever produced. The light fades, and the walls solidify. The mob scatters like roaches when the kitchen light comes on. Peter collapses to the floor and doesn't move for a long time. Hypatia stands alone in the Caesareum. The obelisks of Thutmosis III still flank the entrance outside, ancient beyond reckoning. The lighthouse still burns on the horizon. She picks up the broken roof tile that was meant to end her life. She turns it over in her hands. Then she drops it, walks out into the Alexandrian night, and gets back in her carriage. Now imagine what happens next. Hypatia survives and becomes the proof that religious violence can be defeated by something other than more violence. The story of what happened in the Caesareum spreads across the Roman world. A mob came for the greatest philosopher in Alexandria, and something stopped them. The details get mythologized, as they always do, but the core message is clear. Killing thinkers doesn't make your ideas stronger. It proves they're weak. Cyril's power collapses, not overnight, but steadily, the way a dam cracks before it breaks. The imperial government in Constantinople, already suspicious of his overreach, uses the incident to strip the Parabolani from his control permanently. His influence never recovers. He dies in 444 as a footnote, a bishop who tried to replace philosophy with fanaticism and failed. The Alexandrian school thrives. Hypatia teaches for another 20 years, training a generation of students, men and women, who carry her methods across the Mediterranean. Philosophy and mathematics stay in the open where anyone can access them. The tradition that Plato started and Hypatia inherited doesn't have to be smuggled through Syriac translations and Arabic intermediaries and Moorish libraries over the course of 8 centuries before Europeans rediscover it. It never leaves. Women don't get locked out of intellectual life, because Hypatia's survival proves that a woman can hold the highest position in public thought and the sky doesn't fall. Other women follow her. Within a generation, female philosophers, mathematicians, and astronomers are teaching in Alexandria, Athens, Antioch, Constantinople. The precedent she set, the one that in our timeline was violently erased, becomes permanent. The goddess traditions don't die. Isis worship, which had been the dominant spiritual force in the Mediterranean for centuries, doesn't get stamped out by imperial decree. The Eleusinian mysteries, 2,000 years of sacred initiation, open to men and women alike, where even slaves could participate, don't get banned and burned. Female spiritual authority remains part of the cultural fabric. The idea that God can only be male, that prophets can only be male, that authority can only flow downward from a father, that idea never becomes the unquestioned default. Think about what that means for everything that follows. No witch trials. In our timeline, between 1400 and 1775, an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft across Europe, roughly 75 to 80% of them women. The peak killing years were 1560 to 1630, with the worst concentration in a 300-mile radius around Strasbourg. The Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches, by Im, published in 1487, went through at least 28 editions and explicitly argued that women were inherently susceptible to witchcraft because of their passions and weak nature. None of this happens if the culture that produced it, the one that saw independent women as existential threats to religious order, was defeated in that church in 415. No 1,000-year lockout from education. In our timeline, medieval European universities gave students clerical legal status, and canon law prohibited women from holding clerical status, effectively barring them from every university in Europe for over 700 years. The first woman to earn a doctoral degree was Elena Lucrezia Cornaro Piscopia at the University of Padua in 1678. In the alternative timeline, women are in the academies from the beginning because nobody ever built the wall that kept them out. No burning of Bruno, no silencing of Galileo. Giordano Bruno was burned alive on February 17th, 1600, tongue gagged so he couldn't speak, body naked, for proposing that the universe was infinite. Galileo was forced to recant what he knew to be true about the solar system in 1633 and spent the rest of his life under house arrest. Both were punished by the same institution that killed Hypatia, a church that could not tolerate anyone whose ideas threatened its monopoly on truth. In the alternative timeline, that monopoly never forms. Science doesn't have to fight religion for the right to exist. Reason and inquiry are valued, protected, and funded because the tradition that valued them most was never destroyed. The Renaissance doesn't have to rediscover anything. In our timeline, the great intellectual rebirth of 14th to 16th century Europe was essentially the recovery of knowledge that should never have been lost. Greek philosophy survived through a chain of transmission so fragile it's a miracle it held. Byzantine scribes copied the texts, Syriac Christians translated them, the Abbasid translation movement in Baghdad rendered them into Arabic, and the reconquest of Toledo in 1085 finally brought them back into Latin Europe. The Sabian pagans of Haran, who maintained Neoplatonic philosophy and astral religion for over 800 years after Hypatia's death, were a critical link in that chain. In the alternative timeline, none of that desperate preservation is necessary. The knowledge never goes underground because the institutions that housed it never fell. By the time we reach the modern era, the world looks fundamentally different. Power isn't concentrated in patriarchal dynasties, passing wealth from father to son. The economy rewards creators, thinkers, and builders, the people who actually advance civilization, rather than the parasites who exploit their work. Education is the highest value, not wealth. Governance is organized around merit and accountability, not inheritance and cronyism. Cities function as independent, self-governing communities where people have genuine control over their own lives. War exists. Human beings are still human beings. But it's rarer because the systems that glorified conquest and rewarded domination were never allowed to become the default operating system of civilization. And women aren't fighting for a seat at a table that was built without them. They helped build the table. That's the world that was possible. That's what was on the table in March of 415, when a mob of religious enforcers decided that one brilliant woman was too dangerous to live. They didn't just kill Hypatia, they killed the future she represented. Instead, we got a world with wars without end, billionaires hoarding while billions starve, religious extremism, environmental collapse, and a civilization addicted to dominance and terrified of balance. But the female god in our story said something important. She didn't destroy the mob. She didn't punish them the way their own god would have. She said, "Watch. See what happens when you stop destroying the people who think for themselves." That's all any of us are asking. For a world that stops rewarding the most pathological personalities and starts elevating the wisest ones. A world where Hypatia's tradition, reason, mathematics, open inquiry, the pursuit of truth without fear, isn't something you have to fight to protect, but something so deeply embedded in the culture that no mob could ever threaten it again. Hypatia didn't get to see that world, but maybe we still can. In the book Hyperhumanity, Mike Hockney writes about building a new mythology of female empowerment, one that collects the stories of every goddess, every oracle, every warrior queen, every female genius from every culture across history, a mythology where women don't need permission from patriarchal gods to be powerful. Consider this video a first draft of that mythology, and consider Hypatia its patron saint.